Good evening. I am Katie Lee-Koven, the Executive Director and Chief Curator for the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum of Art here at Utah State. And I want to begin by thanking you for being here tonight for this very special evening, an honor and to learn about the Intermountain Intertribal Indian School. This campus here in Logan for Utah State and the USU campus for Brigham City are located on the ancestral lands of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone. And I have asked my friend, a museum board member, and a mural committee member, Darren Parry, who is former chair of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone, to provide a blessing for us. So please help me welcome Darren.
Welcome. Creator, we come before you with humble hearts this evening, gathered on the ancestral homelands of the Shoshone people, a land that holds many stories, stories of joy and sorrow, of resiliency and hope. Tonight, we gather to remember the children who walk the halls of Intermountain, who left their marks in paint and color, in quiet strength and creativity. Their voices echo through those works of art, speaking across time, reminding us of who they were and who they still are. May we gather, and maybe we be filled with understanding, with healing, and with respect for those who came before us. May we listen and learn with our hearts tonight and carry forward the lessons of the past to create a future of justice and kindness. Aho.
This project is a result of many individuals who have helped us, and I will come back to this slide during my portion of the talk as I've woven them into the story of the murals. But each of these foundations and granting agencies and individuals made this project. It is not only an exhibition, it is a much larger thing than an exhibition. They made it possible. Tonight's event here is made possible with support of the Terra Foundation for American Art. And next month, we'll have a panel discussion with some of the alumni from Intermountain, teachers and scholars. That's on February 27th. And that is supported by the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at BYU and the Cache County Wraps and Restaurant Tax. And our K-12 programs are supported by the Catherine K. Wanless Foundation and professional outreach programs in schools. I want to also thank our Museum Advisory Advancement Board. If you are here, will you please stand? Sorry, I didn't warn you about this, but I know some of them couldn't make it tonight. Our board, our members, and our supporters make exhibitions and programs like this possible. So I thank you. I thank all the individuals, everyone who has made this possible. And like I said, I'll interweave them into my story when it gets to my portion. I have asked Dr. Farina King to provide an overview, a brief overview of Native American boarding school history and introduce you for those who need an introduction. Some of you don't need an introduction to the Intermountain Intertribal Indian School. She has served on the mural committee that we formed and has been incredibly invaluable to us throughout the entire project. So let me just give you a bio about Dr. King. Dr. Farina King is a citizen of the Navajo Nation, King was born in Tuba City and lived in the Navajo Nation as a small child until her family moved to Washington, D.C., where her father worked for the Indian Health Service. Dr. King earned her PhD in American history with an emphasis on Native American history at Arizona State University. Her first book, The Earth Memory Compass, Dene, Landscapes and Education in the 20th Century, was published in 2018. She received her MA in African History from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a bachelor's from Brigham Young University with a double major in History and French Studies. She studied several languages, including French, Portuguese, Yoruba, Wolof, and Navajo, and she plans to learn more languages in the future. Her primary area of research is colonial and post-colonial indigenous studies, mainly indigenous experiences in colonizing forms of education, such as at Federal American Indian boarding schools. Her research traces the changes in Dene education experiences throughout the 20th century. She's facilitated oral histories with Dene boarding school survivors involving former students of the Intermountain Indian School, Crown Point Indian Boarding School, Tuba City Boarding School, Leope Boarding School, and Kayenta Boarding School. The University of Arizona Press published Returning Home, Dene Creative Works from the Intermountain Indian School in 2021, co-authored with Drs. Michael Taylor and James Swenson. Returning Home features Dene students' art, poetry, and writing from the Intermountain Intertribal boarding school. And there was a traveling exhibit that they organized, as well as oral histories with King and Intermountain alumni. And we do have some copies of that book next door in the museum store if you're interested. King also has written and presented about Native American and Indigenous Latter-day Saint experiences in the 20th century, such as her book, I'm not gonna say this accurately, but I'll try, Dene du Gamali, that the University of Kansas published in 2023. And it draws from interviews that she's been conducting for the Latter-day Saint Native American Oral History Project at the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies. Her greatest inspirations are her family, her 3 children, and other than learning different languages and having fun with her family, she loves to sing and travel. So please help me welcome Farina King. Before Farina starts, I just need to let the tech folks know that we need a charger on this computer. This is their provided, so if you can work on that, I can get it up here once you're ready. Because it's, okay.
Yeah, we'll need it.
I think we'll go and hopefully they'll get it.
Okay. Yat she belgana nishle do kiani bashichin. Belgana dashache do sinijani dashanale akot ego atsat nishle. Yehet shikis do shike. Thank you so much to many of our friends and relatives who are here, and thank you for that kind introduction. Really, there's so many people who made it possible for me to be here and who I hope to amplify their voices, and I speak of their feats, of their lives, the ups and the downs, and all those true experiences of being human. And I do not speak for everyone, or certainly not all Dene or all Native Americans. And as I always say, Native Studies 101, there are many, many Native peoples, indigenous peoples of many languages, cultures, and different generations and contexts. And this certainly applies to the constellation of Native American and indigenous, including our Alaska Natives, Kanaka Maoli relatives, so many others affected by policies of weaponizing schools to destroy their very sovereign bodies and identities through different times and places. So we come to gather to talk about the Intermountain Indian Boarding School and these incredible 2 exhibits, so much behind their stories and all the people who made them happen. But I will emphasize over and over again that we would not be here, and we have to center on the boarding schoolers themselves, the people, many, not just hundreds, but thousands, and even in the United States, we are still trying to understand and know the basic information of how many children, youth, people went to these boarding schools, how many were there, and different initiatives have been going on, and there's so many efforts by individuals, by organizations, various groups and entities that I'm not going to delve into naming them all, but I hope this is just a beginning for people and a constant effort to continue to learn. But again, the emphasis is that these are the works of the boarding school students and the people at the boarding school, teachers, community members. It's their art, it's their stories, and there's not only one story. There's the general basic information of Intermountain, such as this image already shows a story of place, many peoples, layers to that. And we can put dates on it of the school officially opened in 1950 in a time known for termination efforts. The very Congressman Arthur Watkins of Utah, who proposed using the facilities of the former Bushnell Military Hospital for a Indian boarding school, as it historically is called, was very much connected to various dynamics of the time. Termination was an effort then to end the sovereign status of Native nations, terminate that sovereignty. What do we mean by sovereignty? The rights of people to make decision for themselves and their future. It's a complex term, and I don't know who all here, how much you have had exposure, understanding of all these terms and all these dynamics. So I do the best to speak pretty broadly in that way. And an overview in less than 15 minutes, it's not going to happen. So I'm doing the best I can to emphasize some key points here. But while we talk about, if we bring up termination in 1950, what is important for us to know and think about is that it's like waves in an ocean. It's not just history repeating itself. These are cycles, and even if those waves have ebbs and flows or come and go, they are still there. And it is very meaningful and impactful that I'm introduced as a citizen of the Navajo Nation. And there's a lot to unpack and what that even means today and pressing. So I'll say that. And that Intermountain has different generations, as it was opened initially for Diné students, because at that time in the 1950s, when the United States was having an economic boom after World War II, most Indian federally funded boarding schools were closed. There were reports already condemning those different schools and their programs. Is that in Navajo Nation at that time, there were families and communities facing disaster. Blizzards, ecological challenges, and some families even struggling to feed their children and seeking help. and there was a declaration of emergency by President at the time, Truman. So schools were seen in many ways as a survival strategy, and it's this combination of all these kind of dynamics, that termination at the time to terminate natives. You not only had to terminate their legal status, but this did not just happen in a vacuum, and as I said, like waves, this happens over and over and over again, including today, including tomorrow. And a part of a strategy is what we say by assimilation. That assimilation is an effort to control who a people are and attack their culture, their ways of knowing, any way that they can distinguish themselves as a people, that collective identity. So Intermountain was designed for that purpose, was a part of many boarding schools, including a system that most people, if they know anything about boarding schools, they'll think about or look into the Carlisle Industrial Institute, founded in 1879. But again, I want to emphasize that that did not happen in a vacuum. As said earlier, there were all kinds of developments and other forms of assimilationist schooling before Carlisle, and before you had a figure like Richard Henry Pratt, who founded the school under the banner of "Kill the Indian, Save the Man," that are the infamous words affiliated with Education for Extinction and Indian federal off-reservation boarding schools. But also at Carlisle and all these different schools, yes, life and history is messy, is complicated, but there are very clear lines of what often get blurred of good and bad. And I find, as I have had experience looking at different requirements for lesson plans in public schools especially, it is implicit, if it's not said directly or brought up directly, of are these schools, were they good or bad? They're talked in terms of those divides. I can say, and I feel I need to, especially now, with an urgency, that a system to destroy Native identity, that is unethical, that is hurtful, and we still have work to do to move away from that and to do better and be better for our posterity. What this gathering is about, and what I especially wanted to focus on with images I wanted to show you, most of them, were of students, their families, their communities, including teachers and people living on the ground who are navigating and making choices every day to resist, to create, to be a human, learn, grow up, have love, face challenges, make mistakes, and that we are celebrating those people who have overcome and continue to overcome. And this is very moving for me to share, because I am a daughter of a father who went to boarding school, was dropped off when he was 5 years old, and my aunties, my uncles, my cousins, and the family that I've come to know and hope to continue to know with Intermountain alumni, who are incredible people. And I'm not just here to, focus only on one group, but to emphasize that these stories matter for all of us, because we are on these native lands that are constantly under attack to be taken for various purposes, why the boarding schools were even formed to begin with, why the termination, why all these efforts, is because often of land and struggle for power and control over those lands and what they mean and signify, and a future of people. So we are all a part of these stories while we learn and try to understand through these windows of these beautiful arts that are not just aesthetic. There's so much more to understand about them, so much more we have to learn. And it's been an incredible journey working with the Returning Home Project and the Repainting efforts and constant efforts for Indigenous truth-telling of boarding schools, and not just trying to, make up a fake understanding of the past that only shows the good sides of us and our ancestors, but how do we understand and learn from wrongs done, mistakes, to do better? I wanted to especially emphasize while all these different kind of boarding schools were designed to destroy Native cultures and peoples, what is so remarkable about these exhibits and so many more pieces to the story that we have yet to connect and to teach and understand is that it inspires us, it gives us strength, and these are stories of generations of strength, not only stories of damage or suffering or victimhood, though those are also all there. And there's a lot still to learn and unpack of injustice, violence, and all kinds of harms, including what happened at Intermountain. However people feel about their experiences and time there. At the same time, and most importantly, it is learning to listen to the stories of those who lived and experienced it, and being sure to follow their guidance, as there are Intermountain alum, their families, and nations and peoples that continue to live. And when you go to see these exhibits and you see these windows that actually preserve those, in a sense, a moment of time, even if it's projecting imagination, a vision, a reconnection to home, you'll see what Indigenous education really is, not what the agendas were, or just the agendas of those who designed and orchestrated these schools to detach and pipeline Native youth away from their families and communities and homelands. We see that these connections continue. And what so many people say, we are still here. What I wanted to close sharing with you is that incredible, really amazing resources were developed with this initiative and these efforts. And I was looking at a booklet that was created for educators from the Intermountain materials, and that different folks like Charlotta and Clayton worked on. And when I was looking at those, they were translated parts in Navajo. And one of the pages said, Holgan, Holhan, what you're trying to say in terms of home. And as I was looking at that page, it really hit me, it struck me that Denepazad Bihosh I'm learning Navajo, the language, my father's first language, the only language of my grandfather, and the language of my ancestors. And I'm only, starting to learn, and I'm learning like an infant, a child, mainly because of boarding schools. Because my father went to a school that drilled in him, like pictures, that I even have at Intermountain. Here's an image, about the design of Intermountain. Sorry, it's not the best image, but this the fact that the image this was on display at one of the Intermountain reunion gatherings. And you can see in the corner there information about the Utah State University NEHMA, Museum of Art, getting the word out about the exhibits and bringing awareness to it. This image shows, what was the plan. You can't see it maybe as well, but they're crossing out what needs to change the language, change the housing, no hogan, not the traditional Dene housing. And even though this really changed in the intertribal period of the school in 1974, English is still the main language that people are communicating in, and maybe they're not teaching all the languages of the up to 100 different Native nations there, and it certainly became a very different school in those later generations, and it's exciting to understand these different contexts of boarding schools and what that means and how they can be rewired, redirected to actually reinforce sovereignty and indigenous identities, and what are the challenges to that. But as I was looking at the booklet and thinking about it, circling back to that, I was really moved to tears that while Intermountain started that way to cut off children and posterity like me from Dene Bazad and our indigenous identities, this is a healing moment to be able to learn and show that to my children and posterity of reconnecting. And it's a lot of hard work, and it's very touching, and I'm very grateful to all those Native, non-Native who have come together for that healing, that from these Intermountain student works that they planted, that they created, like this image even featured on the Returning Home work by Robert Shee, it embodies that returning home and coming full circle, and the hope, Sehasin, as we say in Dene Bazad, it's the hope for the future, and all that is possible because of these kind of efforts. Thank you. I hope to hear many more stories and to continue learning with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Farina. So the second part of our talk this evening is with Sheila Nadimi. So the exhibit is really in three parts. There are the murals, there's a contextual middle part of the exhibit that provides a history on boarding schools as well as Intermountain, and then Sheila Nadimi's photographs, in fact, in the reverse order. So, I'd like to first introduce her, and she's going to share with you her story and path with the photographs that she took of Intermountain. So Sheila is a visual artist and educator currently based in Montreal, where she's co-chair of the visual arts department at John Abbott College. She holds a Master's of Fine Art from Utah State University, she's an Aggie, and postgraduate diploma from the Arnhem Academy of Art and Design in the Netherlands. Prior to her studies in visual art, she obtained a degree in geography from McGill University, which I think is important, worth noting. While her studio practice is currently focused on painting and drawing. Her Eagle Village project has been a focus of her artistic career. Her work has received support from the Graham Foundation and the Netherlands Foundation for Art, Architecture and Design, and she's participated in exhibitions and residencies in Europe, Canada, and the United States. In 2021, which is the year I believe I met her, she was awarded and visiting here while doing a visiting fellow position at the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University. So please help me welcome Sheila Nadimi.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here, being present tonight for this event. It is an absolute privilege for me to share a bit of the how and why and when of the photos that are in the museum. But before I do, I just prepared a brief text that I would like to share with you as an insight and a point of entry into this project that, as Katie said, has been the focus of my artistic career. The project I've entitled Eagle Village is a long-term contemplation and photographic documentation of the vast network of empty buildings that were boarded up and lying fallow following the closure of the Intermountain Indian School. The project was initiated by curiosity, but it was sustained over decades by the conviction that this is a place full of layered, complex, and important meaning. We think of buildings as inert, but these buildings were always shifting and changing, responsive to the movement of time, and amenable to what was unfolding within. It is impossible to reach the core identity of this place. There is no all-knowing insider to turn to for answers for what happened here. There is no fixed narrative to assign to it. Any digging around in the public record alone confirms that the buildings hold multiple truths. A place of confinement and liberation, a place of estrangement and belonging, of isolation and solidarity, of acceptance and resistance, a place of cultural erasure and cultural affirmation, as so clearly evidenced by the murals. The mind tends to want categories of this or that, of either this or either that, but that does not work for these buildings. They invite us instead to sit with paradoxes, grapple with contradictions, and accept that two things can be true at the same time. This is why they have so much to reveal, even now in their absence. While the conviction that this place warrants our attention has traversed my adult life, I can admit that the project was interrupted by doubt. In the first half of the project, a doubt that anyone would ever be interested in this archive. Then, in the second half of the project, a doubt about being the one holding on to and continuing to build this archive as someone with no direct history to this place. These doubts have now dissipated. The photographs have found their time and place. That time being now, with national attention finally on these histories, and that place being here, close to the site where these photographs were taken. I want to thank you, Katie, for your courage to take this content on and for your vision for this exhibition. Thank you to Bolton and the rest of the NAMA staff for all that it took to put together an exhibition of this scope with an artist living 3,000 miles away in another country. And of course, thank you to the former students for your agency to have made this school the home away from home it was for so many of you, and for your determination to return again and again and again, to climb the steep hillside across the highway from your former school, to refresh your mountain monogram, affirming your collective shared histories on this land. Here we can see what the school campus looks like now, a clearing of land so large it can be seen in this aerial view. If you take a photo standing on this clearing with an iPhone, it geotags the property. It geotags its location as Eagle Village, which no longer references anything on the ground. This is how I came to title the project, a digital trace offered by the land itself. And just as the land around it was shaped by forces such as wind and water, I have tried to disentangle the mix of speculation, political agenda, and federal policy that shaped this land over time. This parcel of land is a reminder that war not only destroys, but also shapes the landscape around us, particularly here in the American West. It also reveals how the complex, difficult, and murky immateriality of federal Indian relations materialized on the landscape with the off-reservation Federal Indian Boarding School, the most visible, enduring symbol of those relations. So how did I end up here, and how and why did I begin to take these photographs? I arrived to Cache Valley in 1991 as a newlywed, and we moved into this little pioneer stone home. Everything was new to me, but it was legible to me. Those were the mountains, that is the temple, there is the canyon, that is the sagebrush. What I could not understand, what I had no language to comprehend, was this vast network of abandoned buildings at the side of the highway. These were buildings that I felt compelled by for reasons that I have still yet not fully understood. Every time we drove along Highway 89 past this, for those of you who remember the buildings will recall that the best view of them is just really exiting Sardine Canyon and overlooking the entire property. And for the next 3 years, that's how I built my relationship to the buildings, was from this aerial view from the highway. Every time I drove by, I never failed to look. And this relationship to these buildings was deepening, however, only from their exteriors. All I knew about them when I asked around was that it was a military hospital that experimented with penicillin that turned into an Indian school. But that's all that was shared with me. After I graduated from Utah State University, I went to Holland, as Katie mentioned, to do a postgraduate diploma in the Netherlands. And during that time, I would go to see museums and galleries and encounter paintings that recalled these buildings back in Utah. So even far away, I felt like I was just pulled towards images that were reminding me of these buildings. So when I returned back to Logan, one day, I still don't know what it was that day, but it was the day I was just going to drive over there and look at these buildings up close for the first time. And there was those of you also who know this, that property over the years, it was quite the ghost town. There was really never anybody around. But the day that I drove onto the property, there was one custodian. The only person that I could see in the whole property was a custodian in a little golf cart. So I went up to him and shared my curiosity about these buildings. And he said, well, there's nothing much to see. They're boarded up and dark. There's nothing to look at. But he could sense my curiosity, and he said, if you want, I can bring you into the school building, which was not boarded up, so it was light enough to walk around in there. I didn't only feel that I veered off the highway, but I felt like I veered off into a world that I knew absolutely nothing about. This was the mural in the entrance of that school building. And I felt that this mural spoke of a story that I had never been told, and spoke of people that I was taught so little about. And then a bit further down into the schoolroom was this map, and it, to me, presented a map of America that was a very different America than the one I was getting to know outside of this building. And I had the feeling, this rare feeling that I think we get just a few times in our life, that my entire being was convinced that I had to photograph this place. It was an absolute whole-body conviction that I needed to come back and I needed to find a way to photograph these buildings. My grandfather had just died in Holland a year prior, and the small little inheritance I got had just arrived, and I decided to spend the entire thing on a camera I had no idea how to use. I had never held a medium format camera in my life. It's the best camera you can buy. So it'd be the equivalent of just getting your driver's license and choosing to buy yourself a Ferrari. So this is the camera, and I bought myself an extra lens. I had just enough money to buy the brand new camera, a secondhand wide-angle lens, the light meter that you see in the middle, a quite heavy, sturdy tripod, and this Pelican case that you can see here. And that's what I took with me on every trip to the buildings, along with the flashlight. I obtained written permission from the owners of the property at the time to enter the buildings, which I still can't believe they honored, because they were pitch dark and scary and soon enough quite dangerous to navigate around. These are the buildings that were left after the students, well, in the 90s when I arrived and started photographing, so it's a smaller number of buildings than what the students would have experienced. So there were 27 of the dormitory buildings, 2 school buildings, 1 gymnasium, the maintenance building that's still on the property with the sawtooth roof, and the chapel without a steeple that I could only photograph from the outside because it was just full of storage. And here you see what the contrast of what the students would have experienced in the 1970s through to 84 on the left. You can note, and you might have noticed it in the image that Farina has shared, that a lot of the buildings have these perpendicular corridors, so you could traverse from one building to the next, to the next, to the next. Kind of like in Montreal, how we can bypass minus 30 by the underground city. So you could go from building to building, and that was a design particularly from the Bushnell era, so wheelchairs and stuff could navigate the facility easily. So as you can see, when I arrived and started photographing in the 90s, the football field had become a Kmart. A few of the buildings had come down, including the girls' gym, and the auditorium that I so wished I could have seen was no longer on the landscape. I had a 35mm camera already as being an art student, sort of a standard piece of equipment any art student has. So I also had that camera, and that is what I took to take to take these photos of myself. The only photos, there's only 3 in about 1,000 photos of me, and these are 2 of the 3. And I used just a self-timer to give a sense of scale of the buildings and a record of myself being there. And I can share that the images remind me how dwarfed I felt in front of these architectures, and dwarfed by the histories that they contained. And that was a feeling I'd never had prior with architecture. I'd had it in nature, I'd had it in the wilderness, but never with architecture. So this is inside one of the dormitory buildings, and I quickly learned how difficult it would be to photograph because it was pitch dark. And when someone tells you it's dark, it's very different than when you are in the dark. So I was like, okay, it's dark, but then I was like, oh yeah, it's dark. So I took this photograph with my flashlight, which takes minutes to get this kind of exposure. And if you can see through the curtains, there's a plywood paneling that you probably saw in the first image, and those of you who know the buildings, every window was covered in a plywood paneling. So after this first day of navigating around the facility, with my flashlight, I spoke to the custodian and I said, there's absolutely no way I can photograph. It's just too dark. And so he said, I'll tell you what, you kick out those plywood window coverings, they'll fall to the ground. I'll know where you were. I'll go back and nail them in after. And his kindness, this is my moment to start crying. His kindness and generosity, first of all, to not have sent me away when he saw this young woman pull up, just curious, to have let me into the buildings, and to satisfy some of that curiosity. If he had just sent me away that day when I drove in, I wouldn't be here in front of you right now. None of these photos would ever have been taken, at least by me. And so the generosity, the humanity that he had to see and detect in me that deep curiosity that I could only, that I was sort of not overtly showing, but that he could sort of detect it in me and allowed me to join him for, about an hour he spent with me just showing me around. And then on this day when I said, I don't know what to do, I can't really photograph, it's too dark, he said, you can kick out the window. So that's what I did, and the only reason I could do that as well is because the property was completely barren at the time, so I knew I wouldn't kill anybody with that flying piece of plywood that would come out the window with my foot, by my foot. So I could slowly bring in a bit of light into the buildings. And this is also when I decided that, so the Hasselblad camera, what's interesting about photographing with the Hasselblad is you don't look at the thing you're photographing, you actually look down. And I love this routine of just only looking down. And the negatives are square. And I decided from the beginning that I would maintain that square format. So you'll see that the photos in the museum, they're all square. And there is no retouching or now all the tricks that you can do with Photoshop, there is absolutely no retouching of these images to have them as honest as possible and as close to what I saw through the viewfinder as possible. This is the first mural that I saw. I had no idea that there were murals in those buildings. And the murals are very different from the mural that you saw in the entrance of the school building, which was there to sort of explain, I think, to students and everyone who walked in what that place was about, that you've heard shared by Farina. Whereas these were very different. These were their shared living spaces. They were pretty much on their own, other than their, from what I understand, from their, the dorm staff. And so it was very moving to, with a flashlight, be navigating around and all of a sudden come across something you don't expect. And these buildings that seemed vacant and kind of somewhat lifeless all of a sudden came to life. So here's an example of how I would find the mural with the flashlight. I never knew, they weren't everywhere. I would go hours just navigating around, exploring the buildings. And then to the right would be not the next photo I would take, but one taken years later, because I kept going back to some of these rooms over and over again over years. So you can see the first one, I wanted to remember what it felt like to see it just through the flashlight. So that's being lit with just me standing there holding the flashlight to it. And then the one on the right is the last photo I would have taken of this one. And you see that somebody had come in since and punched a hole in the wall. So this is what was happening more and more towards the later years, is that there was more interventions. So I have other photos of this mural where that hole is not there, for example. So my relationship to them, there was nothing casual about this project. I spent sometimes hours and hours and hours in these rooms. I would go back to Logan, process the film, decide that maybe I didn't like the composition, maybe I wanted a warmer film, would go back, would hope that I could find it again. So this was a very solitary and sort of deep engagement. And as fascinating as the murals are, they were not my only focus. My interest was to really build a spatial archive of these buildings and to be as honest in the photographs of what I saw and to try and really sort of depict the contours of the place, outside, inside, all seasons. So these are 3 examples of just bedrooms where I feel there is just as much meaning as in those murals, because they may be immaterial, but there's a lot of that would have happened in these bedrooms as well. And you can see that the time of the photo is not in the time of the school because of the darkness through the doorway. I was a young mom when I started this project. I had a 2-year-old daughter, who you can see against the building there. And as any young mom knows, all you have are scraps of time. So it needed a whole day to really warrant being out there. 40-minute drive, finding the custodian, unlocking the door, going in, navigating around, kicking, lifting up a guillotine window that maybe hadn't been lifted in, 15 years, wedging it up, kicking out the plywood, set up the tripod, measure the light. It was a very slow process, and so I really needed a real, full day, even just to get, maybe 2-3 photos. So when too much time lapsed between visits, I would sometimes take my children and just photograph the outsides. Of course, I would not bring them in. In fact, I never brought anybody inside the buildings. And a few years later, I had a son, and here he is. These are actually video stills, and I was tempted to include the sound, because the sound is him saying, "Mommy, Mommy, please, I promise I'll be careful. Mommy, Mommy, can I please hold the camera? I promise I won't." I promise I won't. So, yeah. I made mistakes. This photo in one of the common areas. So when I would take the pictures, I would drive back to Logan, get the film processed. So it would sometimes be 2 weeks until I could see what it is that I photographed. And then I would hold the negative up to the window or with the loop that I had to see if the photo turned out okay. But in the past 5 years, I've scanned a number of them. And this one I realized was actually slightly blurry, that I just didn't know. And it was only been through the scanning process that I realized that it was blurry. So you can see that on the back right, there's a winter count, and I tried to zoom in to see if those symbols could be legible, but unfortunately they're not. This is another blurry one, unfortunately, but at least clear enough to see. And what I can share is that over the years and years and years in these buildings, my relationship with them, like with anything that you spend and give your attention to over years, deepens and deepens. But what I was left with that really struck me was how high school students, teenagers, had something that I still wasn't able to access as someone with a Master's of Fine Arts, as an artist, and that is a clear sense of self, a level of self-awareness, and deep connection to land and culture, and a place of being in the world that I felt that I still long to have. The murals there were buildings that had no murals. There were buildings with lots of murals. There were murals in bedrooms, behind doors, in entranceways and exitways, in hallways, up high, down low. And one thing I would like to clarify, because if you have not seen the show yet, when you see it, the title of the project is Eagle Village, so there's no title to any photograph. And the title and the date of the photograph is the date of the project, which is 1996, the date of my first photograph, and 2021, 25 years later, the last photograph. If I had photographed the individual images, I felt that I would be putting them into my time. And these are clearly of another time. So for me to say that this was taken in 2002, for example, as some of these photos were taken, that gives a false sense of the relationship of these interiors to their time. As fascinating, again, as the murals are as works of art in and of themselves, what I found most compelling was their architectural context, where they were, behind the doors, as I said, in the corners of rooms, in bedrooms. These were clearly images that whoever painted them wanted to see when they were in these places. These were not works that were dictated by an assignment or the marketplace or parents. This was just what they must have wanted to put on their own walls in their shared living spaces. And so each of my photos I try as best as possible to give that architectural context. And recently I listened to an interview with the American photographer Taryn Simon, who says that she photographs with an I don't know distance. And I realized looking back that I think that's what I did. I really photographed pulled back. I didn't want to portray any false intimacy with these histories or these artworks that I did not have. I sometimes regret it because I know there might have been perhaps a signature that I did miss. But that was a decision. I made myself a bunch of rules, and that was one of them, was to pull back. 15 years is a very long time for a set of buildings that vast to be off-grid, unheated, and slowly, what were hermetically sealed buildings I felt when I first started photographing, pitch dark as you saw, more light started coming in. I think the custodian stopped putting in some of those plywood coverings I knocked out, and the water roof had leaks, and so they just got more and more deteriorated over time, and evidence of what other visitors, I don't want to call them trespassers because essentially I guess that's what I was, except I had written permission somewhere in a file, but there was just more evidence of these traces being, I could just notice. I would go back and I'm like, that wasn't there last time, that wasn't there last time. So they were probably coming at night, whereas I was coming during the day. So on one occasion, along one of those dark corridors, my foot went through the ground. And I got scared, thinking that's, not something that I wanted to experience, which is falling from one floor into the other in this place where no one would it would take a long time to find me. And then this graffiti in the bathroom on at least my left, is it your left? Yes, where it says, "Those who enter here must die." I thought, I think this is enough. I think it's time for me. I just got too scared. So the fear that I had to overcome of just navigating in the darkness, it was this that really led me to decide to stop photographing the inside. So the last mural I was able to photograph was the one on the right. At this time, the owners of the property had intended to turn the whole facility into a walkable townhome community. And 3 of these former dormitory buildings were transformed, and they are still on the landscape. But their vision for a walkable, carless, high-density living, which now I see more and more in the Utah landscape, was a bit of a radical idea for Brigham City. And so they abandoned their plans. The owners were from New York, I should note. And they abandoned their master plan and eventually decided to demolish the buildings and build single-family homes instead, which are more aligned with the market of Brigham City at the time. But they decided in the end to abandon everything and sold the property. And the whole facility started a very slow, long process of demolition. The gymnasium was still being used at that time just for community events. And inside was this Alan Hauser mural that some of you may be aware of that was inside that gymnasium. And it was starting to become known that there was this artwork in these buildings. And the woman who ran the snack bar on these weekend basketball community events became aware, obviously saw this mural as she worked in that building, and was notified also by some former students who came to visit their campus to indicate to her that that was their teacher that painted this mural, stunning mural. There was an effort to remove it, and at some point it was costly, but they successfully removed it. It's obviously on plaster as a mural, and so not easy to remove, but they did. But it was neglected in storage, and there were people who alerted, I believe, USU that this mural was deteriorating, but it was at that point gone, the deterioration was too far, and it was destroyed. And I think that is something that we wouldn't encounter now, and thankfully we have the murals that have been salvaged at this exhibition as well, which I cannot wait to see. I have not seen them yet. So I also decided, I didn't know when I started the project when it would end, so I just kept going as long as I felt compelled to. So I documented the demolition. This is the school building steps. And that is, again, my son next to the steps. And I would just like to take a moment to thank my children who have shared their childhood with this project. They don't know their life without it. My daughter is flying in from London tomorrow to see it. And my son is here in front of me somewhere, and now 26. And so, yeah, I just, I'm grateful for their embrace of this project and sharing the family table with it. So here's more pictures of the demolition over time. And I have been working for the past 3 years with 2 students from the McGill School of Architecture. With the buildings no longer there, they have helped me design these collages that help the viewer understand where these photos were taken. And so it might be a little bit hard to see at your distance, but it sort of, he chose one of the buildings to almost present a kind of timeline of how the buildings were when I first started photographing, pitch dark, me with the flashlight, and then slowly over the course of the building into the process of demolition. At this point, I was moved back to Canada, and some of you may be aware that we had these schools in Canada as well. They were called residential Indian residential schools, but despite having grown up in Canada, I never knew that. So when I was documenting the Intermountain Indian School, I thought this was an American policy. And then I moved back to Canada, and I was like, wait, we had these schools too? And I want to honor Chief Justice Murray Sinclair, Anishinaabe, who just passed away 6 months ago. And he led the Truth and Reconciliation process in Canada that was initiated in 2008, shortly after I moved back to Canada, and launched the Commission report in 2015. At this time, these stories were just everywhere and garnering national attention. You couldn't turn the radio on without hearing about it. This part of this Truth and Reconciliation Commission process meant this journey that traversed the entire country, and survivors were invited to come and share their stories at a microphone. There were oral histories taken. It was a very long process. It started in 2008, ended in 2015. So I'm listening to these stories, you know, doing the dishes, hearing this person talk about this history, another person, and thinking, okay, well, I have this drawer full of photographs, and what do I do now? So it was really an interview with Murray Sinclair that brought up a point that Farina brought up as well, how we're all involved in these stories in some way. And so it was this point I thought, okay, even though I didn't feel like I was done with the project, I was still photographing, I thought, now is the time to share it. I didn't know how, but I knew that as difficult as it would be to find that how and how to share it as a non-Indigenous person with a drawer full of photographs taken at a federal Indian boarding school, that what would be more inappropriate is hanging on to these photographs and doing nothing with them and just leaving them in my drawer. So I decided to write a book. In order to do that, I felt that I had to connect with the alumni. So when I started this project, believe it or not, there was no internet. There was a time where there was no internet, and that was the time. So I couldn't just Google any question I had, which I'm retrospectively very grateful for, because I lingered for years and years and years with just the mystery of this place and wondering and contemplating. And I think if I could have accessed all the answers right away, I'm not sure I would have spent 25 years of my life photographing this place. So I took a leave of absence from work, and I started just Googling and sending unsolicited emails and every permutation and combination of boarding school, Intermountain, Intertribal. And I met Shirley Hall. And my friend Leslie, who I know is with us tonight, was living in Boulder, and I went to go stay with Leslie, and Shirley drove 3 hours to come meet me, and it was my first encounter with a student that had gone to this school, and she is from the United Nations. And I asked her, how do I get permission to write a book about this place? And she said, you don't need anybody's permission. And I didn't know if I could believe her, but when I walked her back to her car, there was an eagle in the tree right next to her car, just perched. So I chose that as the validation to just go ahead. But given my reticence, Shirley offered to take me to the Navajo Nation. So a few months later, I flew to Santa Fe, and Shirley picked me up, and we drove to an Intermountain alumni meeting, and I asked for permission there. And what I heard at that meeting was, thank you, because we only feel that we're just museum pieces that sometimes feel like nobody's ever talking about us. And so we have no issue with you going forward with this project. I mean, again, that may not be how everyone feels, but I did hear that at this meeting, and I just felt, okay, I will go forward with this. And then a couple of years later, Ronald Geronimo, who I know is with us tonight as well, found me on the internet and said, I think you have a photo of my friend. We spoke over the phone, and it was just the most meaningful. I just couldn't have imagined when I started this project that I would one day be speaking over the phone and having conversations with people who lived in these buildings. And then I think a year or two later, this was a few years ago, I presented at a conference in Tucson, and Ronald Geronimo picked me up, and my son as well, and drove us to the Tohono O'odham Nation Reservation. We spent the whole day driving around his ancestral lands. And then, last May, I am so grateful for the alumni for allowing me to present my project at their reunion, their 40th reunion last May, at the USU Brigham City campus that now sits on the campus site, the site of where their campus was. And this is one of the original buildings still on the property. And I presented the project to them, which I felt that I needed before showing the photos for the very first time here at the exhibition. And I would just end on a quote that is the way my book starts. It's an American artist named Roni Horn. I want to make being here enough. Maybe it's already enough. I won't have to invent enough. I'll be here and I won't do anything. And this place will be here, but I won't do anything to it. I'll just let it be here. And maybe because the me in what's here makes what's here different, maybe that will be enough. Maybe that will be what I'm after. Thank you very much.
So I know we want to get next door so you can see the exhibition if you haven't. I will try to be brief, but I would like to share the journey of the murals with you to give you some context, how I came into this project. The journey of these murals is important to share, and all of the people who were included and involved with these murals along the way, starting with the students who created them, to the people who photographed them, to the time when these buildings came down, but prior to someone deciding and having the foresight, deciding to go in and try to save some of them. So I just want to say, because so many people have been involved also, I'm trying to include them in my remarks, but if I miss someone, please accept my apologies. you'll see that the survival of these murals has been a labor of love for many people, including myself. So USU purchased the property around 2012, I believe. If my dates are off, you'll get the general sense of the trajectory of the murals, though. And there was a director at the Brigham City campus, Andy Schinkel, whom I haven't met yet, but I will be reaching out to, who I've come to learn was the person who took the initiative to take, I presume, a Sawzall, or I'm not sure what, to go and cut some of the artworks out of a few of the buildings before they were torn down. And he placed them in this this garage, which they would keep lawn equipment, things which they weren't going to tear down because they still needed to maintain the grounds. And I wanted to share these to start because it's important to understand kind of the conditions and the state of them. You know, these are murals that have been sitting on the wall since 1982. I mean, far before then, but when the school closed and had no power for many years, and then were taken, cut out of the walls and put in the garage. So they were in really poor conditions, and you know, most of them when they arrived here. Then Andy left as director of USU Brigham City, and Tom Lee, who's here this evening, became dean of that campus. And he asked the dean of the library here, Brad Cole, and Professor Evelyn Funda to come and check out these murals and provide maybe some advice, some ideas, what they should do with them now that they're here. Also during this time, I don't know exactly when, Professor Molly Cannon, who's over the Anthropology Museum and the Museum Studies program here, she had some students do condition reports, which is a great learning exercise. And they had a lot of reporting to do because the condition was so poor. And on a condition report, you write down every detail of issues that you see. So really great, and it was a great resource for me, along with all of the materials Evelyn passed along to me when I came into this project. So Evelyn was retiring and wanting to pass the torch. And then she had a request from, I don't know if it was James or Farina, with their book, and for permission to show images, and then they were going to be exhibiting these in a traveling exhibit. And at that point, the provost at the time, Frank Gailey, said, "You need to talk to Katie." And so, so he asked me to work with her to figure out if we could give permission. And then he eventually asked me to form a committee to figure out the future of these murals. So thank you, Evelyn. This was a gift, and it's been an incredibly, truly one of the most rewarding things I've ever worked on. So it's been, I guess we're all gonna do that tonight. But it's been a real gift and an incredible learning opportunity for me. The book and the research that Farina and James and Michael did and the exhibition were also very useful to us because they'd done a lot of research already. And so when I formed the committee, I wanted some of the students who went to Intermountain. I needed people who were scholars who knew about this, about the history of Native American boarding schools, all of these things that I did not know. And so I really feel like I've been just facilitating this project and stewarding it along, but it would not have been possible with this committee. And so I would just ask that those of you who are on the committee, who are up here on the screen, can you please stand? Thank you. I leaned on them at various times in this project, depending on the question that I had at that time. From the very beginning of being asked to form this committee and determining ownership of these murals, which is a very strange thing to have been asked to do, but was necessary for the sake of really this research and exhibition were the impetus for determining that. And then all the way until just, right before the holidays when we had all of our final texts we were putting on the walls for the exhibit and making sure that we had crossed our T's and dotted our I's and really made sure that we're presenting the information that they want us to present and sending all of that text to them and asking them to let me know what changes need to be made. And I can assure you there were changes that were made. So from the very beginning, throughout this entire process, they have been really critical. So after we determined they were considered abandoned property because it was now owned by USU and from the attorney here. So knowing that we were effectively owners of it, I met with the committee and I said, okay, well, I think before we do anything, I need to see if we can actually conserve these. I don't know if we can save them or if we can save all of them. I don't know. So I first contacted the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and I contacted their conservator while I was asking around. And their conservator, because of the materials, 8 of them being on sheetrock and the scale of them, they felt like they were not best suited to work on them, and they recommended Scott Haskins. And I had also received a recommendation from Scott from a colleague who runs a museum here in Utah. So I felt I had 2 recommendations, and Scott is here tonight. If you can raise your hand, he has a name tag on. So when you're over next door in the reception, ask him questions about you get a light, Scott. And so, and his team, Virginia Panazone, Laura Franchi, and Louisa Parry. So Fine Arts Conservation Lab is located in California. And so I said, Scott, I need you to come here and visit the murals, and I need you to give me see if we can conserve them and give us an estimate. And so he did, and we pulled them all out. They have been moved a couple of times, which I'm kind of skipping over, but, and he said, yeah, we can do this. And so he evaluated all of them, and then he went back and he sent me a quote, an estimate. And I was like, all right, committee, now we're gonna raise the money. So the first thing we did is I reached out to a colleague that I know at the National Endowment for Humanities, and I said, all right, I've got this project. There are a couple of grants you have that I think would be a good fit, but I wanted your input. And so she had some input for me, and so I shared, information about the murals. A couple weeks later, she came back and she said, the chair of the National Endowment for Humanities, Shelley Lowe, would like for you to submit a proposal to her directly. She has discretionary funds she can use, and she is prioritizing projects during her tenure as chair that that support sharing histories and truth-telling of Native American boarding schools. I was floored. I didn't even, So we quickly put together a proposal, and they supported the conservation of, I believe it was 3 or 4 of the murals and associated costs with the framing. And that was the point where I knew we're gonna raise the money. We've got the support and the stamp of approval from the chair of the National Endowment for Humanities to say, this is important and you need to do this. And so we moved forward and continued to fundraise. And before I share a bit more on the conservation, I just want to show you a few images so you have that context when you go over there. There were a number of donors who made it possible following the National Endowment for Humanities and the USU leadership who I had to convince to give me some matching dollars to demonstrate a match to the National Endowment for Humanities. So the Terra Foundation for American Arts supporting some of the conservation, the exhibition, and some programming such as tonight. And I also want to acknowledge Dan Diem, one of our board members for the museum, who really, he'll ask me, Katie, what are your priorities? What are your needs? I was like, Dan, we've got to finish raising, we've got to raise the rest of this money for the conservation. He's like, well, let's create an appeal and really put the word out there. So we created a video and a campaign to continue to raise the money. And that was Dan really pushing us to do that and helping us with that. And then also the Utah Division of Arts and Museums. I reached out to them. They're building a new Museum of Utah on the Capitol. It's under construction right now behind the Capitol. And I used to be I just rolled off of the State Art Acquisition Committee, and I went to Vicki Borns and said, what if you all help me pay to conserve a piece, and in exchange, you need to have a section in your museum about Native American boarding schools in Utah, and you can then have one of these in your museum. And she loved the idea, and they did, so that was great. Sorry, I just wanted to pause right here because there were a lot of individuals, and I just want to thank everyone. The Mariner Eccles Foundation came in and closed the final gap for us to finish that. So during this time of fundraising, I was also attending some of the murals. I didn't have a lot of photos from the last one other than the cake. Because the Allen Hauser. So I was too busy. I would go as a visitor, really, just there to provide information and updates about the murals, see if anyone knew anything about them, knew who made them, let them know where we were with the process. And I mean, last year, I believe there were, 100, 150 people. I mean, there are a lot of people at these, and it's been really a joy. And in September, when they have their next reunion, we've discussed and hope they will bring them over for dinner and to see the exhibition, to make sure they all get over here. So this is around the time I met Sheila as well. She was doing that fellowship at BYU, at the Charles Redd Center, and James Swenson, I asked to come up and lead a book club and film discussion on Native American boarding schools. And I learned about Sheila's work. She shared it with me that evening. And I think amongst so many things that the work does, it helps you understand how pervasive art was at Intermountain. And 3 of her photographs, this is one of them, are murals that we have restored. So I'm so grateful to Sheila to have her work on view with these murals. So when I raised half of the funds, I asked Scott to come and pick up the murals. So, because I knew it would take time for them to work on them, and I knew we would eventually raise the money. And so he did, and it was extensive. We had a lot of meetings throughout the process, conversations to make sure he understood, their team understood our goals. We want these shared in public spaces after we exhibit them. So they need to be finished in that way. Some of the painted surfaces, like on the image on your left, the school would repaint the walls, and so there would be repainted surfaces around the murals, and we had to decide, okay, we'll take it back to the original paint color. I also felt it was important that they weren't finished and felt like paintings, that they have a volume to them. So when you see them, they have a volume, and the weight associated with them is pretty heavy as well. But that also had to do with the fact that they had to take that sheet, that top paper of the sheetrock away from the studs and the rest of the sheetrock. They had to deassify it. I mean, I'm not a conservator, but there was so many components to this process, and they had to figure out what was the proper substrate material to put with that paper, that top part with the painting on it, and what would really be secure with such this fragile material, but also, and so anyhow, there were a lot of conversations throughout. The right hand shows some of the studs, 2x4s, like that were literally still in the back of the murals, like as they were pulling them off. Just a few more images of those. There will be a talk, a member-only talk in the fall that Scott will walk us through all the conservation process. So if you become a member, you'll be invited to that in the fall. Mm-hmm. These two pieces were, one's 13 feet wide and the other's 15 feet long. And they were both paintings that were in public spaces, in gathering spaces in the school, and they were painted on masonite. So these were actually in much better condition. They did have to be resupported and reframed, and there was some painting and cleaning and such. But you saw in the garage images that these were not in as poor of condition as some of the others. On the left here, you see the conserved piece. On the right, you see Sheila's photograph of it when it was in the building. So I want to just briefly give some acknowledgements and context for the exhibition. The story of Intermountain is really unique to Utah and Native American boarding school history, and it deserves to be shared and not forgotten. And as an art museum, we focus on art as an object, but also on how art reflects the larger context of ideas and issues and questions that are core to our human experiences. And these experiences are stories and histories filled with resilience and imagination. So when I was asked to form the committee and preserve and ultimately share these works, it was always to ensure that this history of Intermountain is not forgotten. And it really highlights the role of arts in the students' experiences. Along with there are the list of all these activities that they did when they were there that Lorena has shared. But having art be such a large part of many students' experiences, having notable artist Alan Hauser as the first art teacher hired there to be there for 10 years, it says something about a commitment they had to the arts education that they wanted to provide to students, and the abundance and quality of the art on the walls. Additionally, the fact that you've probably noticed the students who went there refer to themselves as alumni, those that we know, that I have met, those that gather, and they don't refer to themselves as survivors. So these are all things that I think together create the story, or part of the story, of Intermountain. But it also reminds us we cannot understand a history from just one person's perspective. And I've learned about the history from the students who attended there and the teachers who worked there. And this is the history that we share through these murals and the exhibition. Making an exhibition come together like it does, we try to make it look effortless, and for the community and visitors to really focus on the quality and the content and the educational component, and to have we think about that experience. And it may seem effortless, but there's so much effort that goes into an exhibition like this and a project like this. And it's been a labor of love for so many of us. So I would just ask all of my staff who are listed here to please stand. Thank you. And Charlotta and Clayton, thank you for standing at the same time. I wanted to acknowledge they provided the descriptions for the murals, and they're both Dene scholars and educators and translators of the Navajo language, and you can read more about each of them next door. But they provided us with the descriptions. It was not our role to provide descriptions of these murals. And they also provided translations of a number of the exhibit texts into Navajo, or Dene. Intermountain, as you've heard, was only serving Dene students from 1950 to 72, 74. And it became intertribal from 74 to 82. 84? Sorry. Sorry, thank you. While we couldn't provide translations to reflect the languages of all the Native American tribes and students who attended the school, we hope that those from the Navajo Nation will appreciate seeing the exhibition in their native language, but I also think it's a really great opportunity to be exposed to and learn about an Indigenous language. So I just want to thank you again, Charlotta and Clayton, for all the work that you did to help us with that. All right, I also need to acknowledge, in particular, Shannon Erickson, who oversees K-12 and outreach for our museum. Try not to get emotional here, but Shannon, so, you have curators at a museum and you have educators, and they collaborate, but they tend to stick with what they do really well. And Shannon, through the process of getting consult from people like Danny Piper, who's here tonight, and Kelly Fox, and Brenda Bale, and Emily, and then her staff, she poured her heart into this. There's a documentary. So what you're seeing on the right is our mobile art truck. It goes out to rural communities in Utah. And last year we visited around 12,000 kids at schools. And there's a mini version of the exhibit in there. But there's also a documentary she made, interviewing Lorena and other alumni and Farina to tell their stories. She also created a children's book about the murals and the story. And and she had an evening for educators, professional development opportunity for teachers last week at the museum. That's the picture at the top. And she's just, the timeline of Native American boarding schools and Intermountain in the exhibit, Shannon did as our educator. She just was like, we've got to have a timeline. And I was like, well, yeah, we do. And who's going to work on that? And how, and then Shannon, it's like, I've got it. I've got the timeline. I mean, so I just want to thank Shannon, because it has truly been a labor of love, and for her and many of us. The future plans. So as I mentioned, the goal is for them to go in public places following the exhibit. USU Brigham City, the site of where the school was, some of them should go there. That's where the alumni meet. That's the site of where they came from. And they have space that would be appropriate for them and work really well. So I mentioned the Museum of Utah, and we're in conversations with others as well. So, but my goal is that these be in spaces where this history can be shared. So during the reunion, you've heard every year, in the past 5 years, really, Lorena has been the initiator of this. The eye was really fading, and she took the initiative to say, we're going to go up there and repaint that eye. And when I was thinking of the exhibit title, I was like, this is what we're trying to ensure that this history is not forgotten. That is our goal. And so that is the goal of the students who went there, and so that is our goal. And this image shows just, in a crass way when you're driving by, how far up the mountain it is. And the school closed in the early 80s, so all of the students are getting up in age, right? And they're still, if I just showed you this image, it wouldn't seem too treacherous. I mean, it seems a little, like you might trip on a rock, but it's so high up, and they go up every year because they want to ensure that their school and their presence is not forgotten. So in closing, I would like to ask anyone who attended or taught at Intermountain or is a descendant of someone who attended Intermountain to please stand. And if you can raise the house lights. So please join us now next door. I want you to ask them questions, find them. Most of them have name tags. We tried to give name tags to everyone we could. We also, if you don't have a name tag and you went to Intermountain, we have some blanks at the front. We want, Scott, the conservator, has a name tag. Our committee members are here. Ask questions, come and join us for some food and music, and we have a story booth. Please share your story. It'll be then posted on our YouTube page. And thank you so much.